This is tape roll 1 of the Master Music International Callas, job number 4157-2467, recorded on the 24th of April 1968 in Paris. And this will be the Niagara Pulse on this tape, Niagara Pulse. Roll 1, recordist Ron Hooper.
Okay. Slate 1, take 1.
People always talk, when they discuss operatic careers or musical careers, about the... what's that, Mariana? What's that?
You come off. There's a lot of compliments. You're going to kill me, right?
I'm not kidding. I was going to be insulting straight away.
Forgive me. You'd better cut this off.
We'll sit further apart.
This is the inconvenience of being old friends. All right.
All right, we'll start again. All right? Anytime. People talk about the importance of training in a musical career. Do you think that that's exaggerated, or that how one starts work on, for instance, a voice is crucial to how things go?
Yes, I think definitely, because that creates what they call your spinal cord. It's like a child that is well bred from the beginning. If you learn how to read and write correctly, then that will bring you along during and throughout the career. But if you haven't learned exactly what you're supposed to do, and I think that is the greatest handicap.
And do you think one should start on a vocal training very early?
Indeed, I started very early. My teacher, who was Elvira de Hidalgo, started very early. I think, indeed, lots of great singers started very early, especially women.
Of course, she was a Spaniard, you're a Greek. Do you think that it varies very much by nationality?
She is a Spaniard, and I'm a Greek, you're very right, so which means we are Mediterraneans. So women, really, girls do grow up quicker, or they mature quicker. I think also that essentially our career is based on youth. Wisdom later, but unfortunately we can't go as long as conductors. So our wisdom is created later, but our teaching is done early. The earlier, the better.
In a way, as soon as the voice is ready to take lessons and to start to sing in a relatively mature way, you should start work.
I think so.
And you actually started when you were at school in the States, in New York.
You mean...
Started to train.
As I started to train vocally. I must say, I was very privileged in life, if you can call that a privilege. I happened to be in Greece in 1937. I left the States. My mother brought the two girls over. And Elvira de Hidalgo happened to be there for her engagements, for her the private reasons, I can't say. Why I say Elvira de Hidalgo had the real great training, maybe even the last great training of the real bel canto.
Elvira de Hidalgo was a rather distinguished Spanish singer with a brilliant voice and technique. She was active all over the world, particularly in Italy, from the early part of the century until the end of the 1920s. She sang at Covent Garden, she sang at the Metropolitan in New York. Later, she taught in Athens, later still in Turkey.
So as a young girl, which means 13 years old, I was immediately thrown into her arms, meaning that I learned the secrets, that I learned the ways of this bel canto, which of course, as you well know, George, the bel canto is not beautiful singing. It is a way of music. It is a way of, shall we say, the violin playing. The way the violin plays, the voice must play. Why I say violin is because the violin maybe is nearer to the instrument, the vocal instrument, than the piano, though the music is always one, frankly. So if you learn these things quickly and in this bel canto way, well, later on,
you've got something behind you.
Exactly.
Something to go back to.
But it is a very hard training. It's a sort of a straitjacket that you're supposed to put on, whether you like it or not. You have to exactly learn, as I said, to read, to write, to form your sentences, how far you can go, fall, hurt yourself, put yourself back on your feet, continuously lowering the lines of music on this basis of bel canto. Learn music, which is essential. Good taste, which is essential. Good taste is always something that's handed down from one to the other. It's the so-called tradition. And the tradition could be, shall we say, could be misused. In other words, we artists frequently have good taste and less frequently do not have. The public likes good taste but cannot always understand what is liked. Also because years go by, certain years, certain phases in life, certain periods of years, one thing is accepted and later on it is not accepted. In other words, life is modern. Years go, we become modern, so we have to adapt ourselves, though with an old art, which is the art of singing and the art of opera is very young and yet is really old for
Yes.
today.
You say life
Goes on.
changes and goes on, but the art of bel canto remains really the same. It's
That is the schooling.
yes.
The bel canto is definitely the schooling. So if you don't have the bel canto, you cannot sing any opera, as a matter of fact.
This
Not
holds
even
good.
the most modern.
Exactly, for modern operas, for operas of the 19th century, and for the old operas.
If you don't have the bel canto way of singing, which is the schooling, the proper schooling, you just frankly cannot sing for a long time. You might be able to sing on youth, shall we say, on energy for a few years, but it won't take you a long while.
When you were working with Elvira de Hidalgo, was this very hard work for a young girl of 13 and 14, immensely hard work? Were you sustained by a passion for what you wanted to do, or was it something that she was able to put over easily, shall we say, unstrenuously?
It was really not that much hard work. I suppose I was a solitary girl also, shall we say, and I loved music mainly. So whatever concerned music, and of course, as I was in the vocal
Yes.
department, so-called, I was fascinated by listening to all her pupils, singing the various repertoire, which was the light operas, the rather heavy operas, the mezzo-sopranos, even tenors, and it was most interesting because you learned a lot. So I used to go to the conservatoire, 10 o'clock in the morning, and I used to leave with the last pupil. Even Hidalgo was quite amazed because she was asking me frequently, why do you stay here? And I felt, my answer was that even with the least talented pupil, you can learn something, because even from the least talented pupil, he can teach you something that you, mostly talented, might not be able to do. Shall we say like a cabaret dancer? Great dancers in the theater can do many things, but they sometimes cannot do what a cabaret dancer can. In other words, you can always learn. That is where I also heard many operas, many arias,
Yes.
where I therefore indulged, or rather took up at the last minute and enjoyed myself later on in my career. Because I already heard it, assimilated it. I was devouring music then, whatever it was and in any form.
For 10 hours a day.
For 10 hours a day. For me, it was not heavy work. It was really an amusement.
And when you were working with her, you started to study roles, presumably?
Frankly, when I started working with her, it was a year after I had worked with another teacher. Oddly enough, she had a French method, which was placing the voice in the nose, rather nasal. It didn't do me that much harm, in fact. And I had the problem of not having low chest tones, which is essential in the bel canto, or in the Italian music. Essential because, as you know, the chest notes have to build the bridge from the chest note to the middle register and then on. And that's where I learned my chest tone. So when she heard me on an audition, she immediately confesses that she was most attracted by this instrument. But my answer was mainly a rather heavy voice.
A true soprano then, when you were very young?
They say I was not even a true soprano. I was rather towards a mezzo, but that immediately took wings.
Was it a very Greek voice, do you think then? Did other people have voices at all like yours? Hard to tell.
I wouldn't know. Really, that's very difficult to tell.
You worked with her and you started to study roles with a view to appearing fairly soon, either in student performances or at the opera in Athens.
I think the program was set not by myself in life, in the very beginning.
Yes.
It was set by my family, my mother mainly, was commanding the family then. So I had to act accordingly. Of course, I again repeat, it was no trouble for me because I didn't really enjoy myself playing around as children then. And but the program was that, of course, I should become a singer, I should become an artist in any case. Usually what parents say is, well, I sacrificed myself for you, but you will do what I was supposed to do in life. I suppose that's general. So this was a program set. I was supposed to study and not sing immediately, but I'm afraid it didn't last that long, because after 6 months of training with the Hidalgo, I was immediately engaged, shall we say, by the then 6-month-old opera in Greece, or the National Theatre, or Royal Theatre, then had made its branch of opera. And they needed a dramatic soprano. So they had engaged me for 1 year on an agreement that I would not sing anywhere else. And Hidalgo had seen to that contract. So I would have a sum of money, and that would give me the possibility of studying patiently without having the necessity of going around to work, because it was immediately during the war, you know.
Really her farsightedness as much as theirs, or more than
Oh,
theirs.
yes, indeed. And after 6 months, they were doing at the opera Boccaccio at Souper, and they needed a Beatrice, and they asked if I could break my engagement instead of not doing anything but studying, could study and perform. That did me a lot of good also, though, because instead of being a stiff operatic singer, it taught you how to work on freedom of movements, and to be more souple, as they say in French.
Certain lightness.
Lightness on stage.
Yes. And then after that came big heavy roles, or Toscas and...
Yes, I was... Tosca came about, I think, a year and a half later. Cavalleria was already performed. I had already performed for Angelica. So, you see, I already had my heavy roles.
And your real soprano
on my back.
Real soprano roles.
Real soprano roles. But the Hidalgo had one, which is the bel canto way, that no matter how heavy a voice, it should always be kept light. Always be worked on a flexible way. Never to weigh it down.
Which she did on the method, or by studying lighter arias, coloratura arias, supple arias?
The method is usually always on the scales, trills. When we say bel canto, it is not only the method that keeps your voice light, and which is a production, of course, of... it's not so easily put in words. They have written quite a few books on it, but I think they're too intellectual to be able to be reality. But it is flexibility, pushing the instruments into a certain zone where it might be not be too large in sound, but penetrating. And teaching the scales, the trills, all the bel canto embellishments, which is a whole vast language on its own. When you see a trill, when you see a caccatura, which of course is, you have to be a musician to know, there is usually, normally, always a reason for it. But these you learn in your school days.
All these decorations.
All these decorations are not put just in vain by the composers. We then, for instance, had studied on Panofka, on Conconi, which these...
exercises.
Exercises.
But elaborate
prepared,
exercises.
yes. Prepared you to learn a trill. I think pianists use the same approach. They work on a slow scale first, and then they increase the rapidity. You learn the half tones, you learn the down scales in half tone or in a whole tone, the arpège. It is a whole schooling. Of course, I again repeat that these you cannot learn once you're on stage, because then it's a bit too late. Because these can make you, they can break you if you do them on stage, if you're not prepared for them.
And you didn't learn any complete traditional lighter roles? I mean lighter purely from the point of view of techniques and the santurzas and the toscas.
No, I was kept, this was my repertoire, but I was kept on that repertoire. But the light roles that were considered then was norma, which was used by the Hidalgo as an exercise. That this should have prepared me to later on years where I would have been ready for norma. So I remember that I started learning norma in my very early years of my schooling, shall we say, in music.
But many years before you sang it.
Many years before I sang it. At least 10 or 12. So these tricks that we call, and which are not tricks at all, they are just exercises like an athlete who little by little learns his strength, builds his strength, his muscles. This is exactly what they mean by bel canto.
All the things that you need to deal with any musical situation, any musically vocal situation that's going to come in later life is what it amounts to.
Exactly. And what vocal complication depends also, unfortunately, on the word that comes before, on the phrasing, on the same difficult thing or less difficult embellishment. Depends. Sometimes it's difficult because it comes before on account of a heavy or more dramatic word. In other words, even though you've had the schooling, frequently the same thing that seems so easy is very difficult because it depends on what you have before.
Yes, the approach to it.
The approach to it.
How the composer has dealt with it or the dramatist has dealt with it.
And the distances of the voice. It's quite a complicated but a most fascinating lifetime job.
And you went on working with her all the time you were in Greece. That's really during the war, isn't it?
That was during the war, just before and all during the war. I kept on working with her, but I worked also on stage, if you can call that you can call experience, but it is not good work on stage because you can make a lot of mistakes and you can create bad habits on stage, as you will know. You undo those at school. Again, I say by school I mean conservatoire. And when you're home, then you really have to work by yourself because the teacher cannot teach you all. If you really want to look into and pursue the matter, you find these things by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That is why I said just a minute before, it's a lifetime job. The trouble is that not only it never stops, but the more you learn, the less you know that you have learned.
More problems you find.
More problems, more difficulties, more passion, more love, because it's something intangible. We don't have much to go by.
When you'd done these half a dozen roles on the Greek stage in Athens, by the end of the war, you'd really completed, as it turns out, something like a sort of early preparatory period of performance. Am I right?
You're very right. I had completed, shall we say, my school days.
Yes.
I had learned, I had known as how far I can go, what I must do, but when you're young, when you're in the schooling days, you're supposed to dose yourself a lot. After those days, you go, shall I say, I went to Italy and I started my really great career, and the main career. Then you learn to really become a musician. After a singer, you have to put your instrument to the service of music, not only to the bel canto, to the duty and the line of music. Then on, you really become, or you strive to become a musician. In other words, the main instrument of the orchestra.
Yes.
Which is probably, not probably, it is exactly the meaning of prima donna. Prima donna would be first woman. As you are a woman, you are the prima donna of the performance. So you have the first violin of the orchestra. Therefore, being the prima donna, you are the first instrument, you're the soloist of the performance.
Yes, that's a very fair description, I think.
After that, you begin to permit yourself less liberties with working your way out of certain difficult situations, with relaxing some tension before, because if you relax a bit of the tension or you turn around, well, then the note is more sure to come. Note that comes after, because every now and then you get some difficult notes to deal with, especially some traditional notes, because there's very little, shall we say, high notes or cadenzas written by the composers, because they tended to leave their music as they wanted it. Each composer has his way of writing, was very proud of it, and in fact that's what distinguished them.
But intending it to be embellished, to be used expressively by his performers.
The embellishments, I don't think that the composers enjoyed a lot of embellishments, if not for means of expression. Because I have read frequently of their exclamations and of their dislikes about artists in the 18th century, 19th century, where they improvised cadenzas and changed many, many things in their operas. It was a style. It was florid. It was like the way they used to dress then. They powdered. They used to wear wigs and frills, laces. The musicians didn't like all that.
But you would expect it to wear wigs and frills and laces.
Yes, but the sentiment is never frilled and laced. The sentiment is always profound.
Yes.
So the feeling should be brought down to the essentials. And the composers felt that if you're dealing with sentiments, with characters, with music, let us deal with less florid things, or rather let us use embellishments to the service of expressions. In fact, in the later years of Verdi, even Bellini, shall we say, even Donizetti, if you care that much for the composers and not for your own private success, you really care to look into the music, you will always find a trill or an embellishment or a scale that justifies an expression of feeling of happiness or of unhappiness, of uneasiness, anxiety. There is always a reason for such things.
They wrote them for a purpose. They
There
didn't
is
write them for
always a purpose
display.
for things. And if there is not, well then I feel strongly that a musician, I hope at least I managed to be that much of a musician, should always have a way, a meaning of doing something, because otherwise it could be quite stupid. And I don't think today we could get away with a lot of stupidity, because we have everything that is extremely, we have wonderful television, wonderful films. Opera could be very old-fashioned.
And all this you were learning, really, at the time you first went to Italy?
Yes, I learned that with Maestro Serafin.
I've always thought that was the one
That was the
lucky
main
thing that happened
yes,
to you.
that was one of the many lucky things, and maybe the really lucky things, because he taught me that there must be an expression, there must be a justification. He taught me exactly the depth of music,
And this was
the justification of music. That is where I really, really drank all I could from this man.
He was, after all, the first maestro you worked with in Italy.
He was the first, and I'm afraid that he's the last of those kind of maestros. They really don't take trouble. They don't have that much experience, and musicians tend today, generally speaking, I don't want to accuse anyone in particular, but they can't have that experience. They start too young, and they don't have that much humility towards music.
Very few Italian conductors had a more distinguished career than did Tullio Serafin, and perhaps none, apart from Toscanini, more influence. His career spans the entire century, short of a year or two. His time at La Scala alone spread over 40 years, and at Covent Garden with some gaps over 53 years. He conducted at the Met, in Chicago, in South America, and he was artistic director in Rome from 1934 to 43, perhaps his most distinguished and uncompromising period. Above all, Serafin was a singer's conductor.
What I learned from Serafin was that you must serve music, because music is so enormous and can envelop you into such a state of perpetual anxiety and torture, but it is our first and main duty. He always found a reason for something. Like, for instance, on stage, during that period, we didn't have any Luchino Visconti or any metteurs en scène then. They were the
conductors.
The conductors were what they used to call maestro concertatore, direttore of all, chorus, stage. They took care of everything then. What he said impressed me was, when one wants to find a gesture, when you want to find how to act on stage, all you have to do is listen to the music. The composer has already seen to that. If you take the trouble to really listen with your soul and with your ears, and I say soul and ears because the mind must work, but not too much also, you will find every gesture there. And it's so true, you know.
In fact, acting production is a musical thing in opera. That's what it
It is
becomes.
all
The basis is the music.
one reflex, usually. It is one enormous reflex with many, many reflexes put together, which comes back to what we were saying before that. By the time you're on stage dealing with music as a, no more an amateur musician, but a professional, serious musician, you must have no more surprises. You must know whatever comes under your eyes or your reflexes. So technically, you're exactly prepared for it. But mentally, the musician must take care of these and deal with them and bring them off to the public as extremely easy. But believe me, there are many, many reflexes that have to act all in one movement. These things are very difficult to speak about. I'm not good at words. It's a lifetime job. I would have loved that if the public or even critics were able to follow many of our rehearsals many of our, not only rehearsals in the hall, rehearsals in the room, how we go about learning a part, how many months of preparation before we even eventually come to the very first piano rehearsals. How many sacrifices, how many ways of changing, how you don't really change that much, but essentially you mold it into form.
Polish and overcome
Polish
problems.
it
And
eternally.
yes.
Since
You
the
had,
start.
with Seraphine, in fact, you had...
It wasn't very good in the beginning. I can't...
This will be tape roll 2 of Callas, job number 4157-2467, recorded on the 23rd of April 1968 in Paris. This will be the master tape with the Niagara St. Paul's. Tape roll 2, Maria Callas, recordist Ron Hooper. End of item and cut.
Very good.
Slate 2, take 1.
You talked about the training of bel canto being partly to prevent surprises ever happening to one on the stage. You, in fact, have had, in your early career in Italy, something approaching surprises, but not on the stage, more in choice of repertory. Weren't you engaged to sing Wagner and found yourself singing Bellini? I don't mean by mistake, but in the course of the season.
Well, it was nearly by mistake. I mean, it's by a miracle, shall we say. Yes, it's true. I was doing Valkyria, which was my second year at the Fenice of Venice. And I remember there was a great, shall we say, an influenza fever or epidemic. And they were without soprano for Puritani of Bellini. And poor old Serafine was exhausted, desperate. He couldn't find this singer and that singer. We didn't know what to do in the evening, so we were just, sight reading the roll and playing around with the music. So his wife heard me singing the aria, sight reading the aria. And she came in, it was in his apartment, Maestro Serafine's apartment. She says, will you do me a favor? When my husband comes in fact, she didn't call him my husband, she says, Tullio comes in. She says, will you please sing that for him? I said, well, if it'll please him and make him happier, yes. In fact, I did when he came back. He never said a word. The next day, 10 o'clock in the morning, was after already my first performance of Valkyria. I think the next day, or the evening, I think the same evening we had the second Valkyria. And I was called on the telephone, please put your robe and come down. I'll come up, whatever it was. Maestro Serafine. I said, Maestro, I'm not washed up. It'll take me about half an hour. I said, no, come down the way you are. Of course, we wouldn't even say no to. It was sort of a veneration for the Maestro then. And I went down, and he said, sing. I said, what? Sing what you sang to me yesterday. There was the director of the theater, Catozzo then, and I said, anyway, I was forced to sing the aria, and sight read, of course, which was the second time or third time I sight read it. I heard them talking, and he says to me, well, look, Maria, you're going to do this role in a week. I said, I'm going to do what in a week? He says, you're going to sing Puritani in a week. I undertake that you study it. But I said, I can't. I have 3 more Valkyrias. I can't do it. It's ridiculous that I sing Puritani. He says, I guarantee you that you can. So I thought to myself, well, if a man like Serafine, who is no child, knows his job, can guarantee me a thing like that, I will be no fool to say no. And I said, well, Maestro, my best I can do. More than my best, I cannot promise. If I manage to learn the part with my performances of Valkyria and Valkyria, not Sieglinde, Brunhilde. I point out. And he says, all right, I guarantee you that, and you guarantee me that you try. That's good enough for me. So I said, well, inside of myself, if they're crazy enough to think that, then I was still young, and being young, you have to gamble.
I started working, and I managed in 5 days to sing my 3 Valkyrias, to do the Prova Generale of Puritani, and to sing Puritani, which started me on the, as you say, on the so-called light roles, which are not light roles.
Not so light, no.
No, they're not light, as you well know. The Norma is the same woman, or the same voice, shall we say, that sang Puritani, Lucia, Nambula. So she's definitely a dramatic soprano. Because, as they say, the soprano then was soprano assoluto.
Yes.
In other words, with all the possibilities of bel canto embellishments and so forth and so on. She had to be soprano, then there was the contralto, and that was all. Now we have a bit refined this to such a stage that, well, if a soprano doesn't have a trill or doesn't have a scale, never mind. There is no never mind. You can't find a pianist or a violinist not being able to perform his
ornaments and decorations.
Ornaments, the decorations, the scales, the grammar.
I remember your voice at this time, and this was what, about 18 months after you'd made your debut in Italy, that you sang with Puritani and
Exactly.
Brunhilde.
You heard me in Gioconda. It was 1947. If I'm not
August
mistaken.
47.
August 47.
And at that time, the voice, while a very individual one, was a very bright one. I remember it had, it was a very strong, dramatic voice, but it also had this tremendous, I don't know, bright overtones is all I can say. I remember hearing a broadcast of Tristan, Fiore Soldo, 4 or 5 months after that? Gioconda, Verona?
December, the same year.
Yes, from Venice, I think.
Yes, from Venice.
And that was, I didn't hear what the cast was, but it was immediately obvious that this was somebody absolutely out of the usual, with a very individual voice. It didn't take very long to remember where I'd heard that voice before. But you were mostly then singing the straight, I was going to say straight, heavy, dramatic words, but you know what I mean, the Giocondas, the Turandots.
They needed a strong, powerful voice, and in fact, they are still in need of dramatic voices.
Always.
Which is dramatic voice. Again, we come back to what we were saying. It's a dramatic coloratura, because then you could not sing if you didn't have your schooling.
When you say then, you mean 150 years ago?
I mean in 18, yes.
Exactly. 1820 to 1850.
Exactly. You just couldn't sing, and that was all. Well, yes, you have seen the difference, probably more than I. I know I've felt the difference inside of me. I don't know how the voice has performed. But you, along with these, with the years, in 20 odd years that we know each other, should have seen the change as a musician yourself.
There was this tremendous, not only power, but brilliance then. There's always been good brilliance in your voice, but not quite such a bright brilliance. Can one talk about a darker brilliance? I think one must in terms of a voice sometimes. Because the brilliance is always there, but it was brighter then, more flashing. Not flashy, flashing. Then.
Well, it probably was younger also.
It was younger, of course.
And the musician grew. And as the musician grows, you use flashes less, because essentially the music that we do, that the dramatic soprano uses, is not exactly a very flashy. She's usually an unhappy soul, oddly enough, suffering. So you rather use a Chopinish kind of a coloring to the voice. It's an unhappy. Tragic, yes, finally tragic. But the coloring is rather a melancholic coloring.
Did you find that singing Bellini in the middle of singing Wagner, one usually would ask the effect that singing Wagner would have on the Bellini, but what effect did learning Bellini and working intensively on Bellini while you were singing Brunhilde, what effect do you think that had on the Wagner that you were singing?
George, I'm afraid I didn't have that much time to
learn
intention. 5 days. I really didn't have that much time. So the first way, as the approach of a role, which brings us to a subject which is quite interesting also for the public, because they don't know how we do approach a role or how we learn it. You, if you're interested in my explaining...
Fascinating subject, right? When you get a new role, a new part, suggested to you, will you sing, will you consider singing such and such an opera by so-and-so, what happens to you then?
Well, then, it's a very matter-of-fact. You really have to put your feet on your ground and be very matter-of-fact in the beginning. You look at the role, as we know how to read and write, we know how to read our music. We're supposed to. So you read a role, and in the beginning you're enthused, you're exalted, and you say, well, I have a way of my own. This way I've learned from my teacher Hidalgo and also from Serafin, which are the major people in my life. They have taught me, and life has taught me, that the last act is the most important. Because no matter how much and how well you've sung on the very few, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 first acts, if the last act is not superior to all the rest, well, you might as well not sing it. We have sung frequently roles that do not have the best last act, but I essentially choose an opera where at the end the last impression is the best.
So you get the score and you go through
First
with
of all,
particular
because we
attention to the
warm
end.
up.
So the first act is never enough to warm up. And there's no warming up in a room. There's always the real warming up in the hall, in the opera house. Now, coming back to the subject of learning a role, it is brought to me and I look at it and say, well, yes, this would excite me or challenge me. You read it, then, after you say yes, you break it down. In other words,
I keep on interrupting. You go through the score and see how it feels.
You go through the score, so you have a brief look at it. And you say briefly, well, to sum it up in 2 minutes, shall we say, or what it takes, yes, I would like to do it. Now, once you say yes, then you take it, act by act, and you, first of all, say, what is she?
Happens to be a she in my case, of course. Is she a high society? Is she a girl from modest family? Because according to that, you act. The basis is, what is she essentially? If she is of royal family, she has certain gestures. So this is the sketch. You draw a sketch. The first thing is, what is she?
Does the characterization, how can I say, the person agree with the music? You put the music together with the personaggio, and you try to make them agree. Frequently, they do agree. Then you take the music and you learn it as you were in the conservatoire. In other words, exactly as it's written, nothing more and nothing less, which is the phrase that I call straitjacketing.
Absolutely strictly in tempo and
Exactly,
everything.
strictly how the composer wrote it. The conductor gives you his cuts, gives you his possibilities. If you have cadenzas, he gives you ideas about what his cadenzas would be. And his cadenzas, I mean, are never his if he's a conscientious conductor. He always builds his cadenzas according to the taste and the liking and the particular makings of the composer.
Yes.
Because Bellini is quite different from Donizetti. Donizetti is quite different from Rossini, and so forth and so on.
Every rhythm is different one to the other, because each and every one, this is the great things in life, that the great man stands exactly on his own. So this is the first thing you must respect. The first thing to respect is his music. So therefore the conductor gives you his cadenzas according to what he thinks the composer would have liked, and according to your possibilities, of course.
Then you learn the role exactly as A, B, C, D. And when you've learned that, then you try to speak it to yourself, as you have the recitative. By recitative, what do we mean? Speaking. They are the introductions to the arias, usually. Once upon a time, 150 years ago, the public just used to walk out, eat, laugh, I don't know, used to stay eternally in the theater, and would come in for the big pieces. Thank heavens now they don't. So the composers are much more respected now than once upon a time.
Yes.
The recitative are frequently very attractive and very difficult to give a, shall we say, a rhythm, because all music has a certain rhythm. By rhythm, I don't mean the way it's written exactly, because once you learn how it's written and the exact value of each note and each phrase, then, and this I have learned from Serafine in occasion of my Norma, when I auditioned.
This is a parenthesis, but it's very necessary. I had auditioned, and I was beginning to learn the role for Florence.
So he said, very well, you know the music perfectly well. Now you go home, my dear Miss Callas, and speak it to yourself. Keep on speaking, and let's see if, with what proportions, with what rhythm you come back to me tomorrow. Because if you speak it to yourself, how would you do it in music? Forget that you're singing and these are the values. Respect the values, but try to be free for a minute. If you spoke these phrases, how would you speak them? According to Bellini's style and this and that. And on that, you cultivated yourself, which is so true. The recitative must have a certain flowing rhythm. What you give at a certain point, you give back, you take here, you give back there. And the characterization of Italian music is always a flowing movement, no matter how slow things goes, no matter how slow a rhythm. So once you get that in your mind, and it's not done in one day, it's not done in 1 week, and in fact I don't think it's ever finished, because an interpreter grows each year.
Should grow. So what happens to you in life, one opera, for instance, you do Fedora, that has nothing to do with Norma. It might have helped you, though, in other possibilities. So you find things that last year you didn't find. The roles grow each year.
Your Norma has a slightly different pace and feeling.
Very slightly.
After doing something.
Each performance changes,
Yes.
as you well know, because you have heard many of my performances, and you have told me once. I remember that each performance has a slight difference of movement, of novelty. Hadn't you told me that one?
Certainly, yes. Very, very noticeable.
So, from then on, when basically you have created your role,
You've memorized it.
memorized it.
Yes.
At a certain moment, you should forget it completely, because then you forget what you have memorized up to now. So for 2-3 days, possibly you can, you just forget the role, just anything else but that. After 2 days, you go back to the rehearsals or whatever it is, and you find it mature to a point that you start working with the others.
In those 2 days, you've done nothing to it. You
Nothing,
haven't worked
but the
on it.
subconscious has taken over.
Exactly. You've matured it subconsciously.
Your subconscious has matured it and has made it his own, so it helps you out. And it has managed to mature the role, and in other words, then, having broken this down completely, then you can take wings. By taking wings, I mean from down to earth, 2 and 2 makes 4, because everything must be logical in opera, because you can't persuade the public of a preposterous thing.
Of course, opera is preposterous in the first place, because frequently you say on stage, well, andiamo, because people will find us, and yet they're still there. That's what makes a duetto.
Of course, what is the main thing that musicians should do is give it the most credibility possible, and to persuade the public of its reality,
There we come
and
back.
to take them over.
We come to what you were saying about the composer doing something for a purpose. He didn't go on saying andiamo for no purpose and delaying going.
But,
He wants to express something.
Exactly, but also the composers do have some schemes.
Yes.
Schemes of composing, of exigencies then, which today are a bit more preposterous.
Which certainly aren't naturalistic. Anything but.
No, not natural.
As I say, opera is something that has been dead quite a while ago. So if we really don't try our very best to give it much seriousness and much persuasiveness and dignity, it's not taken in with pleasure.
After that,
When you come to the rehearsal, it's really
when you come to the rehearsal, then you work yourself in with the others on stage, here we come back to what I said, that if the critics and if the public could look into our work, I'm quite sure that they would be more lenient and would be more
more understanding, more
love
appreciative,
our job.
more knowledgeable.
Yes, more knowledgeable. Because in one evening, frankly, the public or the critics cannot really take in that much. Because the ear, the eyes, all the senses cannot exactly justify each and every movement of yours, or each and every coloring, or what makes thousands of notes during a 3 or 4 hours performance.
You accept a great deal, take
You
for granted.
accept a great deal, but you cannot say, well, why was that? An ear cannot really, in 4 hours, accept more than, and justify more than that.
You certainly don't analyze it while you're
Cannot
sitting there.
analyze
You
it.
usually don't.
We have done the analyzing.
Yes.
Not only then, but we keep on analyzing it. After 20 years, Norma, for instance, is still analyzed. I know, of course, exactly what she's made of. Or rather, what we think she's made of, because we have just what we have to go by.
But you do a reappraisal each time you approach
Yes.
the role.
Yes. And
Edit it again.
role, yes, exactly. And following, that is why we are here, to try to explain to the public how we go about learning a role. And then once we learn it, how much we have to put of our own soul to persuade not only them, but ourselves that what we're doing, first of all, is something better. In other words, frankly, in operas, not modern, I don't know, because I've never indulged in modern operas, not that I'm against modern music, but I'm a very sentimental person and idealistic person. How can you say it? I believe that in the theater, one goes to see and feel something better than what he usually has in life. We have enough of miserable situations and of things to cope with in life. If we go to the theater, when the public goes out, when he's improved or breathes better and says, well, there's something really worth for, I think that is our main purpose. Now, how we go about that, I don't care, so long as we succeed in that. And music is the straight way to go to the heart and to the minds of people.
You certainly have a difficult enough time dramatically in Norma. You can't have more awkward situations than that.
Yes.
But at least the music
But the music
carries
is
you somewhere.
supreme.
Yes.
The music is very great. That's why it should be really done with the maximum of ease, of dignity, though it is very difficult. And in the last act, I must confess that after 20 years of Norma, I am still amazed at the enormous proportions of this opera, especially last act, third and fourth act.
You talked about studying, working on the individual character, the person that you're going to sing and represent on the stage. When you start work on that, when you actually tackle it, do you do it mostly from the score, from the notes, or from the libretto, or from what approach to the character?
The libretto with the, for instance, let us talk about Anna Bolena.
Yes.
Which is something.
Anne Boleyn, yes.
Anne Boleyn is by Donizetti, as you well know, and history has his story of Anne Boleyn,
Yes.
which is quite different from the Donizetti Anne Boleyn. Donizetti has made her a sublime woman, a victim of circumstances, and nearly a heroine.
Yes, it's a romantic view of history, maybe.
Exactly. So I couldn't bother with history after
No.
a while because it really completely ruined my insight of it. So I had to really go by the music and by Donizetti's libretto. The music itself justifies it. So the main thing, I believe, is not the libretto, is mainly, though I give enormous attention to the words, I try to find truth in the music.
That's what creates your
That
character
is
for
what
you.
creates the character. That is what creates the atmosphere of greatness which the composer has. That is what creates the intangible power of transporting the public into into higher. I wish you could put the words I would like.
I don't know what one can say into it.
Well, bringing them above the
Exaltation,
normal.
yes.
Exaltation, exactly.
When you're working on a new part, at what stage do you ask for collaboration? You obviously need a pianist fairly early on.
Definitely, yes.
Because the singer's job is to sing, not to play the piano.
Pianist, yes. A pianist that can be very, very, shall we say, very particular in teaching you to remind you exactly the values of notes and not let one slip you.
Pianist is a schoolmaster at
Yes.
that stage. They
Well,
often sit down.
yes,
Exactly.
but normally, as you do learn these roles, he is normally a maestro sostituto, as they call.
Yes.
So he is not a normal pianist.
No.
He's just
An operatic
an
pianist.
operatic pianist and one that could prepare the orchestra and who prepares the company generally.
Do you usually work with the maestro at that stage, or
No,
usually not?
no. You usually work with the maestro sostituto.
You learn the role, you roughly learn it, as I say, because this goes in stages. You cannot expect to learn it immediately. You have to give it time to be learned, to be matured, and then leave it, and then retake it. And then after that, it depends whether you have lots of time. If you have lots of time, it can take you even months. But it can take me very little also. It depends. Then you need the company. That usually happens after about 2 weeks' time, or yes. Then all are called for a rehearsal, the first piano rehearsal. Then you start. I usually...
That's with the
that is
maestro, with the conductor.
yes, but with your other colleagues also.
Yes.
I used to, in my early years, I always did, in fact. I used to look at the posters and ask and see when the maestro, the conductor, had his readings
With the orchestra.
with the orchestra, because I'm short-sighted and I cannot depend on cues given to me by the conductor himself or the prompter. So also because I live into the music, and I used to assist to his readings, which is most interesting. So therefore I went when I was quite prepared.
My ear, my mind was prepared to it. There was no... but you see, I had my way of working. This was one. If I knew, for instance, that the tenor was sooner than what he was called for there, or the baritone, I used to ask him to come to my rehearsals, or I to his, if he was ready for the piano rehearsals before the maestro. If not, then we waited for when the conductor, the maestro, was there, and then we would combine. He would say he wanted it this way, approximately. You know, these things are rather intangible. And then things do change also from the piano rehearsal to the orchestra rehearsal. There are certain conductors that change quite a lot with their rhythms. There are certain that don't.
And also their speed, of course.
Exactly, that's
In
what
the
I meant
piano
about
and
the
the-
speed.
yes.
And some don't. Also, they do sometimes because there are many problems, technical problems to cope with. Entrances, exits, chorus, very many difficulties. The chorus cannot be moved quite easily because they have to look at the conductor, because it's very difficult for them to come in at certain points, so it is quite a difficult job. But in any case, before we come with the chorus, after the piano rehearsals, the maestro calls for his first orchestra rehearsal with singers, after he has had his hearings. Well, supposedly he has the orchestra to himself and nobody else. I went and listened just secretly. And then it is called alla italiana, as you will know, with the iron curtain behind the stage. It's vexing for the singers, but in any case, it is just you're seated on stage, and the orchestra is the first approach with orchestra and singers.
Like a rough concert, so to
Like
speak.
a rough concert, so to speak. And...
Sorry.
Already?
Yeah.
Well,
One moment.
the prova l'italiana, I'm getting the terms wrong.
Prova Italiana, you usually have, I'm always talking about the Scala. These are the preparations for new operas, generally, new old operas, as you mentioned. You have usually 2 acts, if you have 4 acts. I think it takes about two hours approximately. So you manage to put in about either 1 act or 2 acts, it depends. Then, when you have had 2 prova alla italiana with all the opera through, then you start working with the stage director. He needs his rehearsals in the meantime. If you haven't worked with him already in the room, by room I mean the large hall where you can, not on stage, then you go on stage and approximately you know where you should stand, how chorus should stand. Frequently those stage directors build it according to the moment.
They improvise it when
They improvise it
Get on the
according,
next
yes, and they ask you frequently, well, what do you think? I would like that. Would you feel it, this movement or that? And then they have to, if it's a very conscientious stage director, he follows your piano rehearsals also with the conductor.
I'm going to say, when does he come in? Because
Well,
surely...
if he is conscientious, he comes during the first rehearsals of ensembles.
Yes.
If he's not, well, you know, they usually do.
You work with people like
Yes, because they
Visconti, and I'm
listen,
sure they do.
yes, they usually listen to the music because they also adore, well, Visconti was an adorer of, and is an adorer of opera since he's the Duke of Visconti during the Scala days. So,
Was that what, grandfather
I think it
who
was
was
grandfather, yes.
the head of the Scala in Toscanini's time? First
Exactly.
time.
And the administrator came in one day and said, Duca, we have, our deficit is not any deficit this year, but we have a gain of, stupid sum of I don't know what. And the Duke turned around and said, how dare you come and tell me a thing like that? He insulted him.
That was years ago.
That was many years ago, yes, exactly. Now, to come back to what we were saying, then you go on stage, only piano rehearsals with the stage director and the chorus, and you build that part up. After that...
How long would that last with an opera
time.
like Anna Bolena, something being done for the first time for many, many
About
years?
25 days as a whole.
Long.
That means that you start at 10 o'clock in the morning and you stop at 12 or 1 o'clock at night. Then you go out and eat, and then you discuss, well, with the conductor or with the director, well, we did that, what do you think? Supposing we do that. In other words, it's a long time.
16 hours a day.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. But it is a wonderful work. Then, together, the first orchestra rehearsal with the chorus, then we're all terrified. Because it's, you know, to put so many people together is really quite terrifying.
That's when all the things that have stuck together start to fall apart.
Well,
Or can do.
Can and do,
Can do.
frequently. And in old operas, like old operas of mine, like the Norma or Traviata, always, nearly always, and I can't say always, at certain points of the chorus, I know exactly where they're going to stop. I know exactly where they're going to repeat the same things for over and over again. One would say, all over the world.
There are certain parts that stick, shall we say. Can't get rid of them. So, finally, you build the whole thing together. Stage, orchestra, colleagues, orchestra, chorus. And in the meantime, you try on your costumes. You've already seen the designs. Then eventually you reach, with a lot of quarreling between the conductor and the stage director, no, this is my rehearsal, no, this is my rehearsal. Well, all right, I can't stop all the time because we have to measure, the space and the breathing and this rhythm of the thing. We also have to measure because still, up to this point, we have not sung the opera and performed the opera straight through. Because you have to do that more than 3 or 4 times.
Yes.
Because you should measure your strength, where you can rest, where you can get away with lots of things. You really have to exactly know where you stand.
I was going to say, when do you first sing it really with full voice, giving as much as you would with the
I am the kind of a singer, this is a very good point you brought up, George, because lots of singers sing in a mezzo voce, which is all right when you begin to learn the part.
Mm-hmm.
So once you start in piano rehearsals, especially in orchestra rehearsals, you must sing out. Because then, if you don't, during the performance or during the rehearsals, because rehearsals are never enough if you don't sing out loud, or rather in the real true voice, you may be in for trouble because you haven't weighed your strength and your capacities.
I certainly remember tenors who used to save their top notes. They never came at the performance either.
That's right.
Wrong side.
Straight 4, take 1.
When do you start actually singing with full voice? Because you don't do that all the way through, do you, in rehearsal?
I'm happy you brought that up, George, because
there is one thing that you must do, you really must, from the very first rehearsals, orchestra rehearsals, absolutely must sing in full voice. For your own sake, for your colleagues' sake.
But they also dose their performance according to your coloring, and the conductors also. The conductor, also the stage director, finds his movements according to the volume of the voice and to.
And the main thing is to test your own possibilities.
Yes.
So therefore, you try the maximum of trying, but even so, you have never sung really the whole role straightforwardly. That is, from the first act to the last act to the last note. Through, so you'll know where you walk.
So it's always had pauses or repeats or something.
Exactly. There's always been a break. There's always been either 2 acts and then 4 acts and 2 acts today and 2 acts tonight, but never really the whole thing through.
Finally, you reach the stage where you wear your costumes for the first time, the anti-prova generale, that you really try to sing the whole thing, possibly with no interruptions, throughout.
Wearing costumes for the first time, then?
Wearing costumes for the first time, which is disastrous, usually, normally. I had another method, though, that if they could prepare them for me sooner, I always wore them a bit before, and I asked if it were possible during certain rehearsals to get used to them, if it was a difficult costume to get used to.
I have a feeling that in Italy the habit is to produce costumes a bit later than in the rest of the world.
Well, Maggio Fiorentino, every time I sang, I loved Florence, and I loved the Maggio Fiorentino, but I remember that it was really the last minute. At the Prova Generale, in fact, an incident about my famous caper, the Medea act, second act, long red cloak was. Why was it long? They had brought the cape, but they didn't have time to try it on me and see how long I would want it. So I had to wear it just as long as it was, and I promise it was very, very long. After this second act, the stage director came up and said, "My, you really carried the cloak so wonderfully. I wouldn't cut it if I were you." So I said, "Well, all right, if you say so." And it stayed long, there you are. But Maggio Fiorentino was always the last minute, like also the acts in 5 days before. But at the Scala, they are quite serious about the work, I must say. So they give you every possibility of preparing your role mentally, physically, and also psychologically. They give you the best chance.
Yeah.
So at this stage again, which probably is about 18 to 20 days by now, you are at shall we say, 5 days before the performance. They give the anteprova generale and
That's the first dress rehearsal.
first dress rehearsal. Then you have your dress rehearsal, the full dress rehearsal. There's no stopping unless it's something terribly, just like a performance with the critics.
And
Usually in the morning or sometimes in the
no.
evening?
Very rarely in the morning. It's not like in Covent Garden.
No, that's always
Usually they
morning.
close the theatre for an evening. They don't have a performance a certain day. And it's very convenient, I must say.
So you sing throughout with no interruption as it was a performance. Then they give you normally not less than 2 days, not more than 3 days before a performance.
Shall we say if you have 1 day rest, Monday is the general rehearsal, Wednesday is the performance, it's a bit too close. We've done it. It is a little bit too close. But if it is Monday, the general rehearsal, and your performance is Friday, well, then it's too much of a rest because your nerves, you have to unwind your nerves.
Yes.
But 1 day, 2 days are fine.
1 day you are practically sick, you're so tired. The second day you rewind, and the third day you're ready to go.
But if it's the 4th day, then you're just too relaxed. The muscle is too relaxed and your nerves are too relaxed. So in any case, you're lucky if you get 2 days rest, which is the perfect thing.
2 days rest out of
yes,
the 3.
Out of the
Yes.
3.
Yes. One
Well,
unwinding.
then, I'd always made a point of singing out loud because you might be a little more tired, but at least you know exactly where you stand. You have no surprises unless
Just by
you
accident.
have accidents and things like that. But I was always against the fact I was admired by all my colleagues and the directors because I always sang through, trying possibly not to push the sound. So this is the rough way of building a role, if you have the possibility.
Then, after the first performance, real good, solid work starts, because then you fill in the blank points. You have made practically a rough sketching, because it can never be the real sketch unless you have had so much time, but there's nothing like stage performances that can fill in the little
Stage performances in front of an audience.
in front of an audience, that you test yourself, your colleagues, the orchestra. It's the intangible things that are so beautiful about music. Then you work the role as years go by, if you care to really work hard. So eventually, with the years, you even can change hairdos, you can change costumes. My Traviata has changed frequently. My Norma, more or less, not much. It has, but not that much, because Norma doesn't stand that much. Medea has changed, definitely.
Yes.
A lot. Because I've seen her a very static figure, a very barbaric creature that knows what she wants from the beginning. And as I grew, I learned to know that Medea, though she was a very nasty character, after all, though, Giasone was even worse than she was.
She was right in...
And she was right.
At least in her motives.
In her motives.
Yes. Not in all her actions.
So I thought later on that if I created a softer hairdo and a softer appearance, that I might really create her as more of a woman, a living woman.
And I think I've managed at the last performances at the Scala that they really felt sorry for her, which is a satisfaction. Of course, when I did Medea, for instance, they immediately said at the Madre Fiorentino that, oh, well, Medea is not all that difficult because, after all, there are 2 children there. She's going to kill her children, or she intends to. So it's a pendant of Norma. And it is not at all a pendant of Norma. She's a completely different character. Different movements, which brings us back to what we say, the rough and basic movements of each role is what she is, where does she come from, because these are certain movements that you use throughout the performance. Each person has your background, what you are, what nationality, or whatever your social standing is.
Very interested that you say the movement of a character rather than the position of a character. I've often heard people talk about a basic position, a basic pose, basic attitude. But movements is really
I
more accurate.
I wouldn't say it's movement.
But it is movement. You're
It
mostly
is
not still.
an atmosphere, but attitude I wouldn't...
No, you think of it as something that isn't at all a still thing. It's a moving thing.
Oh,
Like the music is a moving
no,
thing.
no. The role cannot be still.
No,
Because then whatever is still is dead,
probably.
or is fixed in is not normal.
Mm.
Anything on stage that doesn't move creates more attention than what moves also.
Yes.
So if you don't move, it has to be for some reason, which usually is illogical. Because only movement is logic. Flowing movement has to be, if you make an abrupt movement, it has to be also logic. In other words, everything is logic on stage. And I have to find a reason for everything. Otherwise, if you don't persuade the public that you believe in the role and whatever gesture you do is true, maybe you're not right. But so long as you persuade the public that it's so.
At least you're temporarily right.
That's, yes.
That's
but
permanent.
you have more of a chance to be right than what the public thinks. Also, a characterization, I jump to another, which is the same rather discussion. While you're doing all this work, there are two minds. The mind that creates, or shall we say, all of you that creates, according to the basis that you have, the composer. Then you put yourself into the position of seeing with your mind what you do. Now, if I was in the public, what would I feel like seeing? What would they take? Because we learn how to move in the beginning. After a while, though, it's best to forget how to move.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you start moving 2 steps ahead, 1 step to the left, or then 1 step down, behind, well, then that's the end of real art, I feel.
You're being mechanical.
So you must, as soon as you know really approximately, fairly well, or exactly where you go, what you do, forget it, relax, and really, you can even improvise sometimes, so long as it is within good taste.
Where in all this does a leading, a good, a helpful, a constructive, a creative producer, stage director come in? Do you work with him early? Do you discuss with a Visconti or a Zeffirelli? Do you discuss how a particular role, if it's new, or a particular view of it, if it's a new production of it, how that should go, or does that happen during the rehearsal?
No, it starts before, usually, or just before. They tell you what period is agreed upon, because, as you well know, an opera might be created in such a period, shall we say, 1840, like Traviata. But they change it frequently. In fact, in the earlier years, it was a fiasco on account of its contemporary.
Yes. Something like that, you're crucial to the discussion.
Exactly.
No director would say, oh, by the way, we're playing it in 1900. I forgot to tell you before. You've obviously agreed or refused.
Well, yes.
Something like that.
Yes.
Of course.
In fact, it did happen that I did refuse, and we changed the program because for the Effettuées en Toris, Luchino Visconti had seen it as nearly an oratorio. And I had not at all seen it as an oratorio.
He's wrong.
It's definitely wrong. It is not an oratorio.
Musically wrong.
It could be very, yes, definitely. It can be very still in movements and very flowing, but then, I mean, if you do oratorio, that's a terribly easy way out.
And it's not what it looks like.
It's exactly. Now, from then on, then he said, all right, instead of choosing this period, we choose that period. I hope you like it. I said, all right. I was unhappy about my Fedora period that he chose. It was not Visconti, it was Tatiana Pavlova, the actress, because as we had performed at the Scala in 1870, if I'm not making a mistake, the Traviata, Benoit, who was doing the staging, could not, the scenery and the costumes, could not come again in a month's time with the same period costume. So therefore we had to go further on. It was about 1900. And I disliked that period for that particular opera because this should live with its frills, with its...
you would like it an earlier...
Exactly as it was, yes.
What we would call Victorian.
1880.
Yes.
Fedora lives in that period, it should have been. But so you see, one period ruins the other if it is one behind the other.
Now, when you say Benoit couldn't come...
Well, he didn't want to.
He didn't want to.
He could have.
Yes, he didn't want to.
Could
But really, he should have.
Yes, he should have.
Even though
But
it was the
he
same
could
time.
have done it quite different, and
Cool.
I'm quite sure he...
But there was a feeling against
It was a feeling against that, and then probably it was towards the end of the season, and I was exhausted to discuss it anymore. Then you must leave these people also have it, because
yes.
it's so nice. They usually grant you whatever you want, nearly. So it's always making concessions in life which are not really that important. Though once you start making concessions, then one brings to another. But in any case, Traviata has moved as a personaggio around a lot. In the beginning, I had built it on very little movement. But as I was an instinctive actress, I was guilty of that. And I figured, well, if Visconti comes in the picture,
When you say an
say,
instinctive actress, a musical actress,
instinctive
from the
actress.
first moment I saw you, instinctive from the musical, from the music.
Well, it goes hand in hand.
Yes.
It goes hand in hand. A gesture is made with the music, and but in any case, when you move, it should be instinct, not only music.
Certainly.
Well, it goes hand in hand.
Goes hand in hand.
Like mind with heart goes hand in hand. If mind goes alone without heart, well, then
Yes, it can be wrong.
yes, definitely. Or heart alone without mind is disastrous also. So it should really go all combined. And I was sure that Visconti would have proven to me that I should find the right gestures. He would find everything for me. It was a lovely addition at the Scala
Yes, it
show.
was.
It was a famous edition. But it did prove to me that basically I was right. That on stage, generally, and especially in Traviata, the less I moved, the better it was.
Meaning by that you preferred others to this particular series of performances?
Not others. No. I'm speaking about my own staging, shall we say. And I don't mean scenery, costume.
No,
I
actually
mean
how
my
you yourself
characterization,
moved.
my
Yes.
role.
Yes. You
I
preferred
felt
it
that
less.
Traviata should move, especially
As the opera goes on, the less she moved, logically also her kind of sickness would not permit much movement also. So towards the third and fourth act, the less she moved, the more the music gained and the more the role gained. Also, the public, I can afford little movement.
Certainly.
And towards the last act, I had preferred also a sort of a useless movement, like trying to fetch something, whatever it was, a useless gesture like trying to get the mirror or something on the dressing table and not being able to, and always just dropping the hand because you couldn't quite manage it. Like the breathing should have been shorter, it should have been more. The coloring of the voice should have been a little more tired. In fact, I had, without the critics knowing it, I had a compliment paid to me by saying that the color of my voice, in other words, they wouldn't know how, but the critics said that Callas in Traviata appeared to us tired.
In the last act?
Generally.
Generally, yes.
Yes, and especially in the last act. This was a compliment for me because I struggled so hard to find this particular quiet, rather little tired quality that I wanted, and took a long time to have it. And it's dangerous
Yes.
work also, because it's like on a little thread that can break from one minute to the other, the sound you want.
I remember once when you did Traviata, or were going to do Traviata rather, you talked of, it's only a tiny thing over the role, you talked of
but there are tiny things
the
in
tiny
life
things
and
that are very
in role.
important,
Very
of
important.
staging the prelude as if it was part
We
of
did that in
Willis's
Dallas.
Delirium. And it seemed to be such a marvelous idea, something I'd always half thought
I
of.
managed
Then
to
you
do
think,
that in Dallas, only it is, it takes a lot of good acting and takes a lot of good lighting.
Yes. It's dangerous, of course.
Very
it's risky.
dangerous. But it was justified. That is why I believe in Traviata as a film, because it can work that way, as a flashback, I call it.
Exactly.
Yes. And we managed to have that.
And that came off well. didn't
That
it?
came off
Yes.
well. Also because I loathe beds on stage. And the last act could be a bit of a bore with that bed.
Yes.
You know, getting out from bed, but you have to have the bed on stage, and the public is fascinated always by
Some detail, something that I wish to say that I will never forget what Serafin told me about Isolde when he insisted upon my having some wonderful costumes made, and I promise you I didn't have the money to make them then. He says, you must have beautiful costumes, and especially in these operas that are static. I said, yes, but why that? Why do you insist? And he says, I'll tell you why. For an hour and 10 minutes, the public has nothing to do but look at you. If you don't really fascinate them with your voice, and no matter how much you fascinate them with your voice and your role, they still have all the time, which means an hour and 10 minutes, to cut you to pieces. Take your costume and cut it to pieces. So if you don't really give it the best, you're in for disaster.
And if you really take that and bring it to all other discussions, it is true.
Yes.
The less you give the public that is sitting there and is trying to really cut you to pieces, if we want, because evidently there are publics that adore you, that are fascinated by you, but you do, in 3,000 people approximately, you get a little bit of everything. They're not all musicians, and they don't know, and even the musicians are even less a good audience than just plain people, because then they pretend to know more, and then they even cut you more to pieces.
So at least the vision of what they get should be harmonious, should be nice, like the music that you give them. When music fails to agree to the ear, in other words, to soothe the ear and the heart and the senses, then it has missed its point. That's why I don't agree with modern music. Because whatever bothers the nervous system, especially music that was and is, I'm sure, created for soothing purposes, you've missed your point.
Yes.
Don't you see
This is a complicated...
It's very poorly put, because, as I say, I'm not a good speaker.
Music should be essentially simple, and upon simplicity and beauty of line, it can become great.
I believe in that.
Line. You said before now that you thought that opera, at least in the 19th century sense, the big operas of the 19th century, is really a dead thing. Do you really think it's dead, opera as a whole?
Well, I think it is dead in this sense that today, as of today, the timing is so quick, and opera is rather not modern, shall we say. It's old-fashioned, it's slow in movement, probably. I think we're out of date. That's what I meant by dead.
When you said it's slow in timing, that's really musical timing. Opera music takes...
Never mind.
Black pen, take one.
You've said before now that you thought of opera as being in some way a dead form. Were you really thinking of the whole operatic art, so to speak, or the operas written 100 years and more ago, the sort of operas that you've mostly sung?
I'm afraid it's true that I think it's dead in this sense that you can't very well imagine today of today singing I love you and singing I hate you, or whatever feeling. It can be spoken, it can be screamed, but it's out of style to sing it, frankly.
Well, that's convention, of course.
You sing of happiness, but you just sing no words, probably. Yes. And that's what I mean also because it was quite old-fashioned, I feel. And we haven't done much to modernize it also.
Were you really thinking of how one should approach it when tackling it as a performer, as a recreator of something that was alive and vivid, let's say in 1820 or 30 or 40? Or were you thinking of it from the point of view of the audience, that an audience would inevitably find it an alien, ancient, out-of-date form?
I think the audience, I'm always speaking about the audience, yes. Because after all, we do perform for the audience. Certainly. We can't just perform for ourselves or for the conductor. The audience, again, I say, has to be persuaded.
Our attitude is quite old-fashioned, though we cannot modernize opera too much, because as it is, we must accept it. It is old-fashioned. We must give it a bit of fresh air, cut certain lengthy music, repetitions, try to bring our movements down to the least possible, the most credible to the audience, to create an atmosphere that we can really take them over, make it as credible as we can.
I'm fascinated, I must say, to hear you say this, who were always, when I've heard you, and certainly in your gramophone records, the most faithful, completely faithful interpreter to the composer of, I think, anyone I've ever known, certainly in the singing world.
Well, I think I said before, and I repeat again, that the first duty of a singer, of a musician, is to create or rather to try to feel what the composer wanted.
Because what we go by is, of course, music. How much have we written? We have the necessary, how you read. I'm quite sure that actors have the same problem. You can read a line, but you can make it live with your own manner. Only that you read a line, yes, but here there are music necessities, there are notes, there are the legato, there are the intentions of the composer, and if you are a conscientious musician, you must first of all respect and venerate your composer. So according to what you feel, what you have learned, what you have gathered together, what the composer wanted, then you, within that straitjacketing, if you can possibly call it, then you create the role to your own possibility, because no matter whether it's Bellini or Verdi, you must make it your own in any case.
And you create it, of course, also to your audience.
With respect to the composer.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to respect the conductor, but of course there's a second mind to things, which this is always my way of working now. I'm quite sure there are lots of colleagues of mine that do it exactly this way.
I have two minds. One, the mind that creates, that has to do what she's supposed to, or what it's supposed to, and then I try to detach myself to become the audience, or somebody that looks upon this other person creating.
The performer's mind and a
And it
critical
happens
mind,
all along, it goes along hand in hand. The person, the creator, shall we say, or rather the performer, because we are not creators, we are performers. We try to be faithful, and where we think that the composer may have failed, well, then we can give it a bit of fresh air, a bit of life, which is what I mean by opera being dead. So we give it a breath of life, even if the composer maybe didn't feel it then, because as life goes on, time has changed. Life has become more modern.
People are less patient, I feel. They're less naive, I think.
Yes, yes.
And we must grant them that.
Yes, yes.
If you see a picture which is 20 years older, it was easier, it was more credible. You took things, you believed things easier.
Yes.
100 years ago, things were, even jokes were more easy. Today, people are more serious. You can't fool them that much.
You talked about cutting out, or doing without long stretches that we thought were boring. Do you believe in that?
I believe absolutely in that. I believe in repetition of a melody is usually never good.
I was taught that. It isn't only my belief. I was taught by the great conductors who were De Sabata, who was Serafin, to say the least, the old ones, including Carlo Maria Giulini, say the moderns, Maestro Voto. Not to go into details, but they taught me that a repetition either has to be justified by something or it has to be slightly changed. But usually two, as we call corone, or long notes.
Two sustained held
notes. One kills the other. It must be either one or the other. And even if they are written, they should not be performed.
They would have different
because the ear cannot stand two notes exactly the same length. It's a matter of ear of the audience also. We don't hear that.
Did you usually...
This is a detached mind that tries to hear somebody else that hears.
Did you usually, when singing operas of the earlier 19th century, did you usually cut one verse of a cabaletta and do therefore only one, perhaps?
We usually have these cuts performed by the composers, by the conductors. They already present these cuts. During these rehearsals, as we were saying, the piano rehearsals, well, you feel things that they're a bit long, here it's a bit too long. Well, no, this repetition or this cut, you could use a bigger, lengthier line of music. These are things that are felt in the meantime with the production of the opera. But I do believe that
the sooner you come to the point, in other words, the better it is, if you have any point to come to. And you must always, in other words, you begin, even a phrase, when you speak, once you start, there will be, of course, a legato, even in speaking, then the phrase will end, you will breathe. This is a continuous movement of breathing also, and of singing. What do? We sing, we speak on music form. This is opera.
So, you cannot repeat yourself too much. In fact, the less you repeat yourself, the better it is, unless it is an obsessive, it's needed for an obsessive quality of acting. The caballettas, I wish to continue on that, because when I auditioned for Toscanini in Macbeth, I was still young then, I wasn't as famous as I was now. He said, no, absolutely, you must repeat this cabaletta twice. The composer wanted it, and we must do it. That, I feel, is wrong also.
It's funny,
because yes.
When I was actually going to ask you about whether you did both verses of the opening
I
aria,
never
the
do a
first
cabaletta twice, because frankly, I was taught by Serafin, by all my other composers, and by experience, that the ear takes in one and rarely takes in the second one exactly at the same time. In other words, it is a banal thing like a bis. A bis is never loved as much as very rarely loved.
The first time is the only time, never risk a second time. So mainly music also must be an instrument of theater.
Because it is not an oratorio, and even an oratorio cannot be repeated frequently, because the value of one thing, which would be large, small, or whatever it is, can be taken in once, but must be woven into another movement. If it's repeated, I doubt whether it's always, it doesn't work.
Even after Toscanini...
When we do repeat, we always change certain phrases.
Yes.
Even after
Toscanini had said, you ought to do both.
I was shocked by that.
Did you do both?
I never did sing with Toscanini, but I never did twice the cabaletta.
In Macbeth?
Not in a Macbeth or anyone. I did it in Bellini, in...
Puritani, did you also?
Not Puritani, the later one I did.
Pirata.
But there was another meaning to it. You did the cabaletta, but you changed the vocalizing. That was respected also. I don't know why. It worked. But in Macbeth, it's more theatrical. Lady Macbeth is quite theatrical, especially the first arias. It didn't really work. It doesn't really work. And I think we do much injustice to the composer. Also because once upon a time, they, as we said before, they loved to stay in the theater. And possibly, lots of times, they didn't even listen to certain things. Whereas now, the audience, the public, sits there for 3 or 4 solid hours and has an ear that can take certain things, and they get tired with other things.
In, for instance, Sonnambula at the end, surely you did Non Giunge twice, didn't you?
That is different. That's a showpiece. That is
quite
quite different. And then there exactly is what I say. It's a complete expression of happiness, of joy. There, vocalizing is justified. Because the whole piece is a little naive, shall we say.
It isn't pirata, it isn't norma, where it's serious theater. Repetition is not a nice form. It can't be stood there.
You should not to do the cabaletta after Casta Diva twice.
It is not an absolute thing, I must say. As everything, there is always an exception to the rule. But if one makes a point, for instance, of opening all cuts in Norma, or in, even worse, in Wagner, I say Norma because it happens to be one of the operas, I think it's a very bad thing to open cuts.
Because not all music is really delicious of every composer. There are certain points, certain parts of the opera, even in Verdi, who was much later than Donizetti and Rossini, that today are tiresome.
At least that you don't want to do twice.
Exactly. And, well, not that we don't want to do.
The
It doesn't
public.
matter. We always function as to what the public would want. And whoever does do anything in music, does perform according to his body temperature or his will, well, then he's, according to me, and I don't want to be absolute, but I don't think he's doing justice to what we're here for, what is music, period. So if you feel this is beautiful music and you forget the audience, what they would feel and what they would like to hear, or what they would eventually hear, whether they like it or not, then you are not being an absolute performer.
No, it's a two-sided bargain, so to speak.
You always have to be the performer in function of the composer that the public will listen to. And you must make it a success.
Yes.
So this changes because 100 years ago the public was different. They used to dress different. They used to think differently. Now the public dresses differently, thinks differently, and we must act accordingly, though keeping always the atmosphere and the poetry, the mysticism, what makes theater work.
That's why I don't believe in opera and films, which is something that goes against my interest. I don't know. I feel that opera in its own atmosphere, with its way of dressing, with the people dressing up, going to, maybe even preparing themselves to fight or dislike or like or whatever. But I believe that if you take opera out of this atmosphere, I don't know how it will work.
You think it loses something? That's something
I think
important.
so. I have seen opera in films, and I haven't seen it work really that much yet.
But do you think the same applies to television?
Television is still, I believe, I'm an animal. I can't say that I'm very, very intellectual. That is to a disadvantage and an advantage.
Makes for direct reaction.
Yes, that's right. Without hurting anybody's feeling. But the television is just so small,
Yes.
you can't get in a lot. If you can afford having a personality that can be brought up into a close-up, then it's fine. But it depends. It's all intangible. I don't know. These things work or don't work. It's a matter of personality. It's a matter of artist,
Yes.
of atmosphere.
You think
Maybe you can.
It can
But
sometimes
then
work.
it's one isolated case. I don't see many people working together in a little screen. I don't
That's
know,
the
maybe
problem,
I'm wrong.
isn't it? Yes.
See, these are philosophers.
Yes.
We're talking here to the public.
Yes.
We're opening our minds.
Yes.
And probably what I think, somebody else may not
But
think so.
You doubt if it has much at the moment to say for the future of opera? Television, I mean.
I doubt whether opera can be taken away from its own place
In the theatre.
in the theatre.
What about gramophone records?
That's different. That's different because you close your eyes and
Yes.
you leave your instincts. In other words, you listen. So you create your own atmosphere when you want, how you want.
Did you like making gramophone records?
I don't like making gramophone records because I'm afraid, though I dislike moving a lot on stage, I dislike being hemmed in, as you say. I probably suffer of claustrophobia. So the minute I'm hemmed in my feelings or in breathing, then we have no atmosphere there. You look at things so plainly. You see the musicians. You hear things too well. You don't have, in other words, the orchestra below you.
You, the performer, hear things
The
too well.
performer
Yes.
doesn't have any atmosphere. So you get nervous. It's another atmosphere. It's another hearing. Your hearing is completely disturbed. I'm not the kind of artist that prefers, unfortunately, record making, though I have made many records.
Made rather a lot.
And
Yes.
I'm thankful to it also.
Yes.
But I dislike it. Tires me.
Do you think it's that gramophone records can... I'm trying to avoid saying
Is it
prove a
faithful, I
substitute.
wonder? I can't say because I've never heard
I
myself
think
except on gramophone.
it certainly says
You can
something
say
about
that.
you that is relevant. It said that is true.
I was
relevant
wondering,
about
though,
you.
is it faithful? Is it completely faithful?
I don't think that
You can say that.
most gramophone records capture all of an important performer. They capture a lot, but not all. That, I think, is asking a great deal.
I couldn't say that because
And I think-
our acoustic is quite different.
Yes, that I see.
So,
And I'm speaking as a gramophone addict. I've always been a gramophone addict from almost childhood. I've always
Yes,
had
you
gramophone
have.
records. I like gramophone
In
records.
fact, you've been an opera fan.
Oh, yes, that's
Since
true.
I
That's certainly.
met you
That's
long
certainly.
while
It
ago.
was after childhood.
Well, You were
Just.
quite young then. It was my age.
A long time ago. Some time ago.
Well, quite a while ago, yes. We're all very young and very enthusiastic, and even we come back to the discussion that you had asked me before, saying we were more technical then in our work. We would do music rather in a cold way. It had to be done that way, and we had to reach that note well done, regardless of, well, a certain conscientiousness.
Do you mean that when one's a young performer, one's more of an athlete than an artist?
Exactly.
That you do a tremendously difficult physical thing.
I feel that I was more of an athlete
Yes.
than
And
an
later
artist.
you become somebody who's trying to penetrate into an art form
I
and do
think
something
so.
that is...
I wasn't ready yet, and I didn't have the time. I was busy making a career, I was busy performing, and I wasn't ready yet. I was growing, I suppose. And also, time changed with us.
This is what we learn from old people, what I learned from old Seraphine, to always prepare a phrase, to always dig deeper into what the composer wanted and how he felt and how he used to struggle on one phrase to show the horror or the love or the poetry, all this atmosphere.
But no, that's real. That's not
So that
old-fashioned.
is,
That's not
well, feeling is real.
Feeling is real.
Feeling was always real. And I feel that deep feeling, honest feeling, is and always will be.
Though we see things today that are far from that, I firmly believe that in the deep of, even of our youth today, that is the trouble. They are afraid of really being romantic, sentimental, old-fashioned.
Committing themselves to something like that.
They want to be modern. Feeling can never be modern. You can be more objective, you can be less patient, but I firmly believe that we are, in the depth of our souls, we are romantic, sentimental, only we don't want to show it, which is the most hateful thing in life.
That, of course, is the expression. This is really what you were saying about opera as an art form, that the feeling is right and true, and in no sense dead, but the expression can sometimes
we don't
be
have
ancient.
courage to feel, to know what we feel, or rather, if we feel something that, well, our colleagues or our friends will say, oh, how ridiculous, how nonsensical. We're afraid of what other people will think. That, I think, we should find strength today, and youth should find strength. Youth, I mean, because after all, we function, our youth is gone. It's always a matter of 20 years difference, unfortunately. Unfortunately, that's what makes life. But youngsters think that if they let their hair grow long, or if they wear, I don't know, the hippies or things like that, that is not a way of showing themselves strong. I think they have to think, take time to think sanely, healthily, even if the others will say, oh, how stupid you are, how ridiculous, how old-fashioned. In other words,
It's a matter of
be
expression,
strong.
isn't it?
A matter of strength.
That's the fundamental
Of believing
thing.
in what you believe. But of course that goes a long way, because there are criminals also who believe they're right.
Oh, yes.
Now, we take the general feeling that if a general person, this is philosophy, it's not opera, but it functions also in music. If a healthy sentiment, a healthy mind, that also works in music. And a career lasts a long while if the attitude that you have towards it is healthy and old-fashioned, which is always modern, because it is always strung to its basic feeling, which is strong, healthy, normal. I can't put it in any other words.
That seems all right,
Yes.
I would think.
I think we're running off.
If opera's in danger of dying or becoming a dead art, what can one do to revive it? After all, you're an operatic performer. You don't want it to die.
No,
Or be dead.
no, definitely not. But it is a danger in this sense. How can we revive it? How can we revive anything? We have to have excellent performers. We have to have excellent stage directors, but not too much of them. Because whereas I feel, these are all things that we feel. I can't condemn anybody, but when I used to begin working in Italy, we had the conductors who were the stage directors, nearly always. So they had the essential, comfortable scenery. It's like a tableau that's near to the reality. Now I think there's too much going on stage. Stage directors say, well, artists don't know how, singers don't know how to move around, so let's put a lot of scenery, let's put a lot of movement. So the eye takes in too much, is too confused, and the music is less served.
Do you think they can get in the way?
I think that there's a lot, too much going on stage today.
You've talked about performers and what they can do to
Yes.
keep opera alive, but what about composers?
I don't
Isn't that
think
an
that we
important
really
matter?
need composers. I think that it's very difficult to top a Verdi, a
Yes.
Bellini, a Rossini, a Donizetti. Though intellectuals can say, oh, but they're so old-fashioned. There's nothing old-fashioned other than performers. It's difficult to create another Beethoven.
Mhm.
Probably, I hope, during the centuries to come, that another Beethoven or Mozart will come to life. But it's quite difficult that we create another.
It's true, but of course that's what people objected before Verdi's Otello. They said that there was no way of capping Rossini's Otello, and before Rossini's Barbieri, that why should he write something which had been perfectly done by Paisiello?
Well, these things are judged by the years. I remember certain performances of mine, Traviata and Norma. I used to do them in one manner, and then as the years passed by, I changed. The public changes. He thinks as soon as he has heard your performance and he goes home and his mind works, maybe even before going home, his mind works and he exalts some qualities of you and he forgets certain mistakes that you have made or certain bad things. So there you are being exalted and you never know what goes on in the mind of the public.
No, true.
So you have to always teach them, or rather gently show them the way sometimes. As I said, that we have a manner of theater. We are speaking by music.
Mm-hmm.
So we are already handicapped.
Yes, handicapped, except that you've got a possibility of greater expression through music,
Yes.
even than one has.
Yes, but we have a pattern set forward. We have certain pauses that we cannot take liberty. Music goes on. For instance, in a pause, you can never bring a pause. By pause, I mean no music, just before a duet or an aria. You can't pull that up to a certain amount.
You can't invent
You make
it.
you can't. No. You can't. No, what I mean, you can't have it last more than, how was it, a split second? I've never counted. You cannot. Well, sometimes. It depends on what comes before and what's, because then the public immediately gets uneasy and he says, what's going on? Is there an accident? Has something gone wrong? So you can never really be taught these things. We are essentially, opera is theater.
Mm-hmm. Oh, certainly.
So we do have rules of theater. We function as long as theater functions.
Mm-hmm. Are you really so pessimistic about composers for the future? Composers writing new operas, finding new forms?
I'm not pessimistic. I don't think that it's the composer's fault. I think it's the public's fault, because as soon as a composer comes along with a lovely melody, what will the public say? He is imitating Verdi, or this reminds me of Puccini, or this reminds me of Bellini.
That's the critics.
No, the public.
Public too.
Unfortunately, also the public. So they just don't leave certain people live easily. Also, musicians don't have the courage to say, well, this is what I feel. Whether I'm going to make a living out of it, whether I'm going to starve to death, never mind, which is what once upon a time composers really starved to death and were acknowledged after death.
Oh, yes, yes.
Today, we don't have that courage anymore, I feel.
Do you think we don't?
I don't think youth has that courage anymore. They can grow their hair long, but they can't risk...
You're a pessimist.
I hope.
You told me once you were a
so.
pessimist.
Yes.
By nature.
I hope so, but that is true, that I don't think generally anybody can risk, because if it's not the man that wants to risk, it's the wife that says, well, I want this, and my neighbor has that, and why don't I have, and my children don't have that. This is generally speaking, I suppose.
I suspect that was always true.
Yes, well, the wives, once upon a time, they just tended to their homes, their children. Today, they tend more to be independent. They want more things. Today, we have many more things. We have everything at our disposal with more or less possibility. So we have less time to think, less time to even study ourselves, feel, gather our ideas, put them together, add our sums together. This all amounts to the same problem.
Well, I hope if we produce the singers to do the operas of the past as they should be done, as you were saying.
Yes, but we have to produce also conductors.
And conductors.
Because today, we don't have many conductors.
No, we're short of conductors.
We are short of conductors. We are short of good tradition. Well, everything's too quick today. Even careers are quicker. You can manage, you can become greater easily because we don't have too much, as they say in Italian, concorrenza. There are too few of us. Competition. There is too little competition. A beautiful voice is an immediate success because the public likes it immediately. They don't bother about other things. So when you're an immediate success, it is rare that you last long. And the main thing is that the conductor is supposed to teach you what you have already learned in the conservatoire. You forget once you go on stage. The conductors teach you these things, and today you don't have many conductors who can teach you.
I mean, they go on and teach you how to apply it.
How to apply it.
Yes.
And then you have to teach yourself. I find that there are very few today.
Fewer than they used to be.
Few conductors, few excellent artists.
You don't think that's partly because you now know so much, and obviously a great deal more than you did when you first went to Italy in 1947?
When I went to Italy in 1947, there were more voices. Much more preparation.
I was thinking of conductors.
There were many more conductors, many more conductors.
Conductors who really knew.
Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
You were lucky you found a good one.
I was very lucky to...
And back to where we were.
I think I'm...
When you first started your career in Italy, Maria, you really were a straightforward, dramatic soprano, at least in the roles you chose to sing, or perhaps the roles you were asked to sing.
Yes, the roles, this was really my repertoire.
Gioconda, Isolde.
I was always studying, in any case, lighter roles, but mainly for souplesse, you know. But I had already studied normal, for instance. I was always ready for that. I had studied Traviata, never Lucia, because I never considered it. I never took it into consideration. But I was really considered a dramatic soprano, dramatico coloratura, as they say.
But the study was part really of the bel canto process, the process to avoid being surprised on the stage, in effect.
Well, the bel canto study is, of course, I consider the same study, the same approach as a pianist or especially a violinist. This is music. So you always have to it's like a muscle that you have to keep entirely relaxed. Always relaxed, even with the most difficult performing, as they call, and with souplesse.
Yes, and the study of these roles was all really in aid of that. It was a practical way of doing it.
Yes.
And when you started to sing them, Puritani, I think, was the first one, wasn't it? The first one you sang in Italy.
That is true.
When you started, when you made a great success in that, did this change your mind a little bit in the scope of your repertoire, or did you always really have it in the back of your mind?
Yes, I do come back to your question and answer it directly. It's true. I did start off with these heavy roles because generally, and even right now, I'm afraid they don't have dramatic sopranos.
That's true.
So they either have dramatic sopranos who don't have high notes, who don't have the elasticity, the coloratura. Once upon a time, you just couldn't sing without. So, of course, as you say, I had to accept certain roles just to make a career. And like I did Turandot in my very early years in Italy. But as soon as I could stop singing that, I did.
You were happy
because, well, I was happy too because it's not considered a very good role for the voice, and frankly also stage-wise it's a very static role, and when you hear everybody saying it's bad for you, it's best that you listen to the majority.
That didn't apply to Wagner, though.
No.
Or did it?
No. Wagner could never hurt your voice if you know how to sing well, if you don't push the sound further. Because, frankly, you should never push the sound. You should always sing lightly and within the note.
But that you enjoyed singing, didn't you?
Oh, yes.
Brunhilde and
Yes.
Isolde?
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
It was a great experience. Though I always sang them in Italian, because then in Italy they couldn't accept German roles, Wagner rather, but only in Italian.
Yes.
As you well know, even in Bologna, until lately, I don't know now, they just don't accept. They consider Wagner rather heavy and difficult to understand.
You probably sang them, by the way, in the Boito translation, didn't you? I think
Probably.
Tristan is in Boito
Probably,
translation.
exactly. But they've changed it. Each maestro
Yes.
has his certain phrasing. Also, once upon a time, you sang certain words that were old, very prim. Now you change into certain words.
Yes, more direct or something.
Like
More.
Norma, there's a typical phrase where they say in the first, Norma says, purgar questa atmosphere. I don't remember exactly the words. Well, Serafin took it also immediately, said sanare. I mean, instead of, I don't know, how would you explain it? Because it could sound not nice to the public. Today.
Yes.
So, you play around a
Yes.
little bit with but I enjoyed Wagner a lot. It was a great help to later roles.
You mentioned Norma, and in a way, outside, we've always thought of this as being not only your role number one, but the whole of your early career leading up to this role. I think that's partly true.
I prefer Norma also as a character, because I don't say she resembles to me, or maybe yes in a certain way. I mean, she's very strong, very ferocious at times,
Yes.
and it's actually she really is not. She's very
She's got great powers of forgiveness, at
yes,
least,
and forgiveness.
and ability.
So, in other words, she just roars like a lion, but actually she's not.
Was that when Norma arrived to perform, did you feel this was something that everything else had been leading up to? Yes, I imagine. And it was...
And I'm sure my teacher, even Hidalgo, was leading up to that.
Yes. She must have heard that in your voice for many years.
From the very beginning.
Yes. And you probably too.
Yes, because you see, I like things, and a melody has to be intense, lengthy, absolutely straight. It has to start at a height and end in a height. So the straighter, the simpler the melody is, the more you have wings of
The possibilities of expression.
Of expression and of nobility.
Yes.
So Norma is exceedingly difficult, and I like challenge.
It's certainly a challenge.
And after 20 years, more or less, of Norma, it certainly still is a challenge.
When you started within reach of a performance of Norma, when you were preparing the performance as opposed to studying the role, did it have very special, particular problems of its own? I don't mean only it's a tremendously exacting role, tremendously long role, very high, at least it's got a lot of top notes, it has its own problems there, but
No.
did it have particular emotional problems that were...
When you're younger, you tend less to have emotional problems. Then as you perform the role, it becomes more difficult because, as I was saying before, the musician prevails, and then you grow into the role, or you grow as a woman, you find certain situations that you didn't before. So unfortunately, when you let yourself get emotions, as much as any actor can let himself get emotions, and he should, you always have one phrase or naturally, a phrase, as I say, that is much better, that is more logical, and the atmosphere is created, but you always say it eventually in another exposed note, or because you can't calculate everything. Also because your own emotion and circumstances, acoustic, millions of things, reflexes, one day react one way, and the other day react another way.
How do you prepare yourself for the performance of Norma when you're going onto the stage? How do you think of the big recitative and aria of Casta Diva, one of the biggest pieces any soprano has to sing? Do you think of it as a prayer to the goddess?
I really don't like Casta Diva that much, to tell you the truth.
Really?
It's amazing.
Really? And it is, yeah. Do you think of it as a straight prayer to the goddess, or
It is a straight prayer of the goddess, but if we really want to think of Norma in the first act,
yes.
it certainly is she exactly knows where she's reaching, but she dislikes what she's doing, because she knows that she's really searching for time. She doesn't want to hurt her or Pollione. She knows that she can't hold these people much longer. She knows that she can't stall for time, as they say, much longer. And yet, if you think of the first act, how she really gets to them and says, time has not come for them. And even when time comes, they themselves will ruin, will destroy themselves. You think of that.
The Romans themselves.
Yes, the Romans themselves. I wonder whether she really was sincere in thinking that, or was frankly stalling for time. These are all open. All these things are open to discussion.
Is it a prayer that everybody else hears publicly?
Then, the
Yes.
Casta Diva is only a consequence of, well, I've dominated you, and now here we're doing what we believe in.
got another singer. And there we have. I'm happy to sing with
She
you.
is actually a singer.
You would be happy to be there, would you?
I don't know how she came through. In fact, when I do sing, I have to keep them out of the room.
You might even react to them. I think you better dance them. I don't know.
I'm afraid I'll have to give her over. Come. Oh, no. You could do better than that, normally. Follow. You're still excited, my love, eh? You're still excited, I know. You could perform better, eh? You see?